Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stronger Together, a CW Supergirl fan podcast. My name's Snowy.
And I'm Nick.
Today we are going to dive into episodes 2 and 3 of season 1. But before we do that, on March 31st, 1959, Supergirl debuted in Action Comics number 252, and more recently, DC Films released a trailer this year on March 31st for the new Supergirl film that is coming out in June.
So we will be talking a little bit about it. I guess for those that don't know, Supergirl debuted in Action Comics 252. And it was basically Superman discovering the crash landing of Kara. And then they discover that they are cousins. He figures out that his dad was her dad's brother. And also the fact that Argo survived for a while after Krypton's destruction. He drops her in the Midvale orphanage, leaves her with a wig, a brown wig. Kara decides on the name Linda Lee for her secret identity, and Superman promises to train her. Right? It is somewhat similar to what we get on the show.
Yes.
But I think the most interesting or more recent thing is that they released the trailer for the 2026 movie with Millie Alcock. The movie is loosely based, so far as we know, in the Woman of Tomorrow run of the comic that came out in 2021, right?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to see the trailer?
I did see the trailer, and the feel of it does seem like they have taken and stuck with that they were pulling from the Woman of Tomorrow comic. I
Yes.
think the biggest change of something that wasn't in that comic is that Lobo is going to be in the film.
Yes.
But that makes sense for sort of broader Kryptonian lore. He is a known sort of villain for Kryptonians.
Mhm.
Uh, and I'm sure that's because they're also trying to tie that into more DC projects going forward.
Also, there was the rumor that when the story was first pitched to DC for the run of the comics, it was with Lobo in it, but because it was only granted like 8 issues,
Mm.
they had to cut him out of the story.
Ye
Because to be
Yeah.
fair, like the 8 issues are packed, like
Mhm.
everything that happens in those 8 issues are is like very important. I think for the exploration of Kara as a character or Supergirl.
Yeah. I also think Krem is a good villain for the comic.
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe it's just because I love the comic as it is. I'll just caveat that. Um, I'm not sure it needed another. I like that there was a lot of focus on Kara and on Ruthie, and the villain was there, but it was more about them.
Yeah, I'm mostly curious to see how they change because I have told you about how I felt that they will have to change stuff just because of timelines. Like as far as we know, the Kara from the movies is very recent that she quote unquote landed on Earth, and
Mhm.
therefore is very new to being Supergirl.
Mhm.
When in the comics, she is a very more seasoned superhero, right?
Yeah, there's
So
definitely a much more seasoned feeling.
exactly. So I knew that it will have to change a little bit about that, but I'm optimistically curious about the movie. It does look good, like from a
Mhm.
storyline standpoint. I will say I would like a little bit more color
Me
on the because
too.
the comics is so beautiful, so
They're gorgeous.
colorful, it's
Like,
gorgeous that I think the earthy tones of the trailers that we have seen it doesn't translate as well. But that being said, as far as we know, there's very big elements from the comics in the feeling of the trailer.
yeah, and it makes me I had this feeling that I know in this day and age, usually trailers reveal a lot. And
Yes.
I do think this one does reveal a lot, particularly if you haven't actually read this comic.
Yes.
But as someone who's read the comic more than once, like I feel like they are trying to hide certain things. And I think it's a good approach because this comic is an experience, truly.
Absolutely. I will say that if you have read the comic, it does feel like most of the trailer is based on the first issue that came out.
Yes.
You see snippets of other volumes of the comic, but most of it is from the first. I will say that in comparison to with the first trailer that we saw of the movie, I'm glad they moved a little bit away from the Kara is a drunk feeling, because I don't think it's representative neither of the character of the comic. But some people
Yeah,
got
I agree a
really
lot.
fixated on that. Got really fixated on that. So I'm glad that the trailer show another aspect of Kara, and this version of Kara and the version of Kara from the comic.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, and I think to try and keep it as straightforward as possible is there is this trope that a man can be together, but a woman ends up being messy. So I am also glad to see that the snippets from this trailer seem to move away from that.
Yes,
That gives me, I think for this film, I'm cautiously optimistic at this point.
exactly. Well, we will probably do a somewhat maybe spoiler free review of the movie when it comes out.
Mhm.
So stay tuned for that. That being said, I think we can start with the episodes of the show that we are actually recapping and reviewing.
Yeah, I am game. Let's go.
And we start with episode 2 called Stronger Together. And basically, these two episodes talk about the first challenges that Kara has as Supergirl. These two episodes are basically her first steps and stumble a little bit because she is biting too much for the first time that she is trying to do it. We start with Didio training her,
Mhm.
and they have a little bit of banter about with Hank about saying that it was because she was a woman, and it's not because she's a woman, it's because she's an alien and she's an agent, and every agent needs to go to this training. But I did like that there was a voiceover at the start of the episode that Kara says, Superman's story, but this is not it. This is mine story. And this is basically like the true line of these two episodes. Basically, Kara stepping out of Superman's shadow.
Yes, it really is, and I think it's also a bit of a preview of the introduction they will, I think, in the very next episode, finally give Supergirl, where she has her sort of intro voiceover explaining who she
Yes,
is. In my mind, it kind of is their main title almost, and then they jump into the episodes. What I love about this opening scene in particular is I love how much fun she is having. She's clearly just very free,
absolutely.
very loose, and also the fact that they show her starting to be smart with her powers in some ways. As much as these episodes are about her sort of stumbling a little before she finds her footing, I like that they also show that there are certain things she seems to be doing just instinctively well, like showing that intellect, showing that innovative spirit I think she has in general as a person. I also love that this ties back into the rooftop scene with Win, where we were talking about how it's almost about wanting to be free enough to pursue what you want and be excited about it. I like that this scene really solidifies that for Kara in a concrete way. This is her being who she wants to be. She's Supergirl, she's doing what she wants to do. She's out in the open in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, but also that is like, quote unquote the lesson and the arc that she will have in both these episodes. It is the fact that she's so overeager that
Yes.
she doesn't really have the base footing of her what her heroine is going to be. And the episode takes us for her being like having these drills with the Dio with the missiles. And Alexis has a really nice scenes where she's proud that Kara like broke the sound barrier. But then and it has to do with the fact that Hank doesn't really trust Kara to be Supergirl, to be like this hero that she wants to be, and and that is presenting us, and that is the arc, right? Because in
Mhm.
this episode, the pretty much the very next scene that Kara has with the DEO, it is Alex basically kicking her ass in a kryptonite room. That is something that I mentioned in the previous episode about how I liked that. Yes, Kara has the strength, but Alex has the training, and they complement each other. But there is a lesson for Kara in this one. Right before the training, Kara has her first fumble, And that fumble is like when she breaks a tanker on the bay and basically causes an oil spill trying to save it from a fire. And it is those big heroism acts that she wants to do, but she's not ready. And that is basically the lesson that this episode wants to instill on her.
Yeah, it seemed interesting to me because in the suit montage in the pilot episode, they show her doing like smaller things. So I find it interesting. I think it makes sense that she's over eager because I think that's also very in character. I think she's the kind of person who she's willing to jump into things a little bit, and like
Yes,
underneath it all. She wants to just jump in and do things and help, and so of course she's going for these bigger things, and I think she is excited to, but I think yeah, the lesson is maybe you need to slow it down a little. Maybe start a little smaller. And I do think something interesting that happened in the training room sequence with Alex is the kryptonite. Once again, it's the kryptonite's just there. And I think not so much, I mean, they've established the DEO has it, but I find
yes.
it interesting they don't even give Kara enough time to pause to have a real reaction to it. The I think in these early episodes, there's really not a bigger discussion about kryptonite at this point. My memory serving me anyway.
She just accepts the fact that the DO has it, and that they have it because there is a possibility that they will need to fight other Kryptonians. Obviously, it defocuses on Superman, but obviously, this season is going to show us that he's not the only Kryptonian around. And obviously, it comes in handy. But yeah, Kara doesn't really have any reaction to the kryptonite. I do like that they explained that the kryptonite room is like at 18%. So it basically does nothing to Kara.
Yeah.
And the effect that the kryptonite has on Kara along the series is very fluctuating, like from making no change in her to her being almost dying for the same amount of kryptonite. So it goes out the window as the show progresses. Another thing that I wanted to mention, following your true line, is the fact that it makes sense that Kara will want to do these bigger things because, from her point of view, she's been waiting for this opportunity for 15 years. She
Yeah.
wanted to help Superman's basically since she landed, and that is one of the reasons that along the show, and I think the episode that explain it the best is the Maid Bell episode in season 3, but it is
Mhm.
the fact that she wants to help basically since she landed. So obviously she's over eager, and she
Mhm.
wants to help. She's been waiting for this opportunity
Yeah.
for 15 years.
She got the green light. She's like, "Let's go."
Exactly. Exactly. But also, like, this is part of her personality. She's very
Mhm.
impulsive. Not even just as Supergirl, as Kara, she's very impulsive, and then she has to like reel it back because she is following. She doesn't want to call attention to Kara Danvers, right? That has
Mhm.
been her secret identity for 15 years. So it is an interesting study of Kara as a character in the sense that we know that she is impulsive, and she pretty much that is the lesson that Alex is trying to tell her. Like, calm down. You need to take a moment, think your strategy, and then act. That is
Mhm.
basically the lesson of this episode. But she gets like very into trying to do the most and help people, and sometimes
Mhm.
it bites her in the ass. And that is what happened with the tanker. And that is basically, I she has a line that I do like a lot about how she went from hero to eco terrorist in 1 second that she
Yes.
tells it to win. But along the episode, we have some moving forward with the love triangle that they are trying to establish in this season.
Mhm.
That scene where Kara has a heart to heart with Kat basically devolves into her asking for help from James and Wynn. And that is
Yes.
when they realize that the other knows the secret identity. Weirdly, it becomes this basically fighting for Kara's affection thing that they have going on.
Yeah, they're like posturing.
Yes. It becomes kind of a staple of the season, especially because it's the only season that Kat is in. But it becomes like a staple that Kat inadvertently tells Kara what to do as Supergirl.
Yes. Yes.
So she tells Supergirl that she should take it a step back, go back to basics.
Mhm.
And along the episode, also, Kat wants to have an interview face to face with Supergirl, and she tasks James with securing that interview for her. And that is basically
Yes.
the arc that he has in this episode.
I think for me, what I really love about this episode is I think maybe because I tried to think about this like when I watched it live
Mhm.
and now, and I think it stays true for me. I do think the energy of this episode, for all that it is sort of a hero's first steps, they need to learn kind of almost like entire episode, not even just a sequence. You know how in a lot of things the hero has like the training sequence and da 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 da. Da. This whole
Mhm.
episode is kind of that. But I think the thing that always stood out to me about this episode is I think I already kind of said it is I love the positivity about it. I think we had gone through there quite a few iterations of superheroes where being a superhero isn't necessarily joyous. And I love that this episode, you really feel her joy, her impulsiveness, but on some level, you're kind of like, I get it. Why wouldn't you be excited? Why wouldn't you be want to just go help with everything? So it's like on some level, I love that they kind of lean into that energy a bit in this episode. And I think another thing I noticed rewatching this episode for the podcast is the scene where Cat Grant is giving Kara the Supergirl advice. She actually says the word whoopsie. And I was like, how delightful is it that we got Cat Grant saying the word whoopsie?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This episode also has, like, they were basically following the formula of villain of the week.
Yes.
And this episode introduces the Helgramite, that instead of being like one person, is like a race in the universe of the show. And
Hmm.
we get this information because this Helgramite was an escapee from Ross, and he was breaking in chemical factories. But what I want to mention is that that factory was named Plastino Chemicals, and Plastino was the guy that created Supergirl. It was the artist that created the first issue of when Kara first appeared, Action Comics 252 that we were talking
Yes.
earlier. And they also mentioned like Sector 52, which I think is a nod to the very recent New 52 at the time when this show was being written.
Yeah, and in the montage that they do in this episode of Win and James helping Kara do smaller things, get back to basics. There
Yes.
is a Easter egg that she helps an ambulance that's trapped on Donner Avenue,
Yes.
which was an Easter egg to the director of the 1978 Superman film, Richard Donner, which I remember I giggled when that came up on screen the first time I watched this episode.
I did love those Easter eggs. Though also, was it this episode when Kat writes the Millennial Falcon joke?
Yes, the article's name is Millennial Falcon, which I guess for folks who may not know is a reference to the Millennium Falcon in the original Star Wars films. Han Solo was the pilot of them, and in real life, Callista Flockhart is married to the actor Harrison Ford, who played Han Solo in those films.
And they do all the Harrison Ford jokes in season one, to be fair.
Oh, yes.
And I laugh every time.
Yeah,
But
same.
yeah, in that scene with that first scene with the Helgramite, Kara is who discovers that it is a Helgramite because of the forensic evidence that he left, and we get treated by a flashback of Krypton. And I have to say, Krypton in this season in particular looks amazing. Like it looks so completely different from the rest of the scenes on National City
Mhm.
or on Earth. Like the little effects and the like the furniture that they have in the scenes, the wardrobe that the actors wears, it looks so very different to the National City version of the episode. And
Mhm.
honestly, for the rest of the show, even though they try to maintain that aesthetics for Krypton.
I think another thing I noticed about this particular part of the episode that I think is important for this season in particular is it feels like this episode starts to really integrate the crossovers between the DEO, the flashbacks, and Catco because the way that they handled, I think, the transitions here between the flashbacks and the DEO, I think were actually really beautiful. Very well done.
Yeah, the flow of the episode is very well done. I did like, for example, in the Krypton scene, like the background that we got from Kara, that she was a very curious child, to the point that she basically interrogates her mom about what she was doing or why she was late, and that is when she gets like the hologramite, and she immediately goes to the orb, or that is like a hologram that is basically an encyclopedia for her.
Mhm.
And then she learns everything that she needs to know about the Helgramite.
The impulsiveness, the nerdiness, iconic.
Yes, absolutely. But when she realized this information to the EO, then they get the idea that the Helgramite is like building a bomb because of the
Mhm.
chemical that he has been stealing. But along the episode, we get the information that actually that chemical that is he's been stealing is actually his source of food. So they create a trap for him, basically, very obvious trap, that they are basically transporting this chemical along the a very empty highway. Obviously, the guy attacks, but what they don't know is that he's working for Astra, and
Mhm.
Astra basically tasked him with capturing Supergirl. Kara never shows up because the DEO never told her, and instead he kidnapped Alex. Not that he knows that Alex is important for Kara, but he kidnapped a DEO agent and takes her to Astra.
Mhm.
We get a scene between Alex and Astra when Alex thinks that Astra is Allura. Astra explains Allura and her were twins and that the twins were really rare in Krypton. Alongside this scene, there is one that is basically playing parallel about how James needed to secure this interview with Kara as Supergirl because of Kat, and he didn't really want to, but Kara says that she will do it
Yeah.
because she explained the S. Do you want to take it away?
I this might be one of the best. I think it is one of the best scenes in the episode, even though I think in general this episode is very strong. I will say like the dynamics between I think Kat and Kara are very well established. The dynamics between James and Kara are getting pretty strongly established. But circling back to the scene is I think this is such an important scene on a multitude of levels, particularly at this point for our character who is going through this stumbling of I think trying to find her style and her way of doing things as much as she says in the pilot, she wants to do things like Superman's doing. I think this is her starting to realize she needs to find her own way and almost without consciously realizing it on some level. But I think a lot of it does come from the fact that essentially what happens in this scene is it really gets brought home, I think, to James, but not just to James, but also to the viewer. She is not Superman. She is Supergirl, and a huge part of the difference is that she did grow up on Krypton. She remembers it. So there's this difference of Superman is very much an immigrant because he was a baby when he landed on Earth, and Kara is a refugee who remembers the home she lost. So this is her explaining the S is not just an S or her family crest. Yes, it stands for the House of El, but there's a meaning behind it, and the meaning is El Mayara. It stands for El Mayara, Stronger Together. And she goes on to say, Superman is so used to doing things on his own. And I think in some ways she understands why that's valid, but she says for her, she was raised in this place where you shouldn't be afraid to ask for help and to also help others and to work together. And she is basically in or her own way basically realizing that's what she wants. She wants to move forward with the help of the people around her, be that Alex, be that James, be that Win. But this is her way of doing it, is sort of, I guess at the end of the day, working together, almost that mutual compassion I think people can have for each other, I think is more her style of doing things.
Yeah, I did like that when they were talking, James mentions that Clark never talks about Krypton.
Mhm.
That is why we get the explanation like Kara remembers Krypton. Of course, he doesn't talk about it because he doesn't remember he was a baby.
Mhm.
But just like you said, she is talking about her culture, and that is what differentiates her from Superman and Clark. But when she's talking with James, she gets the call from Hank that Alex has been kidnapped. And we get this scene of Kara being mad at Hank because he didn't trust her to go after the Hellgramite, and now because of that they kidnap her sister. But she goes flying and going on her superpowers to find Alex, and she does by listening to her. And when she does find her, she finds her with Astra, and we get this beautiful scene between Melissa and Laura, and about the shock that she has at seeing her aunt alive, because for her Astra was dead because she was supposedly on Krypton. And that is when Astra reveals to Kara that actually she was in the Phantom Zone because Allura like imprisoned her there. She reveals that her mission is basically not let Earth go in the same path as Krypton. The plan that Astra has is basically conquer Earth to avoid that future. But Kara barely plainly says that she's not going to let that happen because she sees this as conquering, obviously. They fight. Astra is a trained militaire, so she gets the upper hand very easily from Kara. But Kara remembers the advice that Alex gave her earlier in the episode when they were training, and that it was using the enemy power against themselves. Does. She gets the upper hand long enough for Hank and Didio to arrive, and then he stabs Astra with a kryptonite dagger. That is basically how the fight ends. Alex very easily defeats the Hellgramite, which is funny. And then Alex and Kara share a desperate and beautiful hug. Overall, a great sequence. What do you think?
I think this scene has so much going on. Like, don't think it's going too far to say it's almost a master class in how you can have a fight scene have meaning and have emotion tied into it, which I think makes fight scenes hit harder. For me, like the opening of this scene when Kara gets there and she sees Astra, once again, hard to articulate all the little nuances and details that Melissa is doing with her acting here. But just that initial look on her face when she sees Astra, it feels like Kara is a child again and just completely lost and shocked. And you see this progression. She even says, "You're dead. Everyone died." And you feel how much Kara, I think, is still feels all of that pain. She still feels all of that loss. It's just, it's under the surface, which I think is very understandable. I think a lot of people do this when they've experienced extreme loss or extreme trauma, but it's like just to see that in the acting is really powerful. And then there's this progression in this sort of really strong shift in her acting as the scene progresses, and she realizes Astra is not just trying to conquer Earth, but I think a little bit in Kara's head is, you're trying to attack my family, like my whatever my newfound family is. And I think in Kara's head, she's not gonna allow that. Like, this is her home now. And you just see this shift in progression in the acting that I think is really beautiful. And of course we get this fight scene, and I think there's a lot of sort of dialogue tied to their history together, and also just honestly, arguably one of the more beautiful fight scenes in the show. Just how much of the wire work they did, the choreography of it is really beautiful. And then you end with the Danvers sisters having this desperate hug, where to me it really bookends the start of the scene, which is also quite emotional, but with someone else who's important to Kara. So just overall, just beautifully well done scene.
Indeed. After they rescue Alex, who had been injured with her fight with the Hellgramite, they go to the DO, they go to the infirmary. Alex presents Kara with a room that she prepared with the hologram of Allura. And we have another beautiful scene where Kara is very grateful and like heartbroken about seeing, her mom like that. The hologram says something like, "You can ask me anything." And Kara is like, "I ask for a hug." And the hologram heartbreakingly says, "I am not programmed to do that." And then she asks about Astra. We follow Alex though. When she comes out, she thanks Hank for letting her like set up that room. And it is basically the first time that Hank calls Kara Supergirl instead of Miss Danvers. The scene where Kara asks for a hug, that scene is heartbreaking, but it is one of those scenes that will come back once and again in this season, like Kara asking stuff to the hologram of Allura.
I really love the end sequence here because I forgot how kind of packed this episode is. Like the reveal of Astra so early to
It's a
our
lot.
in-universe characters is a lot, but the end of this episode, I have to say, has one of the funnest, I think, cliffhangers this show ever did in an episode. Is what's the thing that's dangling in the corner with everything else going on that maybe we've all kind of forgotten about watching the rest of this episode unfold? The interview that Cat Grant wants with Supergirl and the threat to James's job. So, Cat Grant she's downstairs outside of Catco. For some reason, she's calling James as she's leaving the building saying, "Well, I hope you're setting up interviews for me for a new creative director because, you didn't get me that interview." And he responds with, "Actually, your interview just started." And essentially, Cat looks out the window and we can tell she's like at the top of the Catco building. It cuts to us seeing Supergirl carrying the car, and it ends with she puts the car down. Cat Grant gets out of the car, and Supergirl says to her, "James told me you wanted to talk. Let's talk." And then the episode ends.
Yeah, it's an excellent cliffhanger. It hooks you immediately. But it is good for us because that is exactly how the third episode starts. Immediately after that scene, and the first thing that Kat says when she gets out of that car is, "It's you." So for me, watching it this time, it was like, oh, Kat clocked that Supergirl was Kara, at least in hindsight. Because at the time, it was almost like a conspiracy theory if Kat knew or not. So for me this time, she at the very least suspected it. And it was just waiting for some proof, even though it was never really confirmed when she actually figured it out. But in that interview, Kat is very pointed in her questions, but they are very much trying to compare her to Superman. So in one of those questions, Kara, that was a question about family actually, like if you wanted to have kids or something. Kara in an Orbus says like nobody asked these questions to my cousin, and that is the first reveal for the public that Supergirl and Superman are related, are indeed cousins. And that is basically what Kat writes and reveals to the public. And we cut immediately to the next day. Kara is having breakfast at Noonan's Iconic. She is revealing left and right that she's an alien, but no one takes her seriously because it's a joke. But someone that is not taking it as a joke is Alex, that shows up and has a very funny face when she overhears Kara saying that she's an alien to the waitress. And Alex is like, you have to stop telling people that you are an alien and Supergirl. And immediately in the back of her, there is a TV saying, Cat Grant got the exclusive that Supergirl and Superman are cousins. And Alex, I think, could have murdered Kara, and she will be valid for that.
Yeah, I think Alex was very stabby at that moment.
Yeah. But then comes James Olsen, and Alex immediately clocks that Kara has a crush on him. Immediately. Because she gets all dorky even more than she
Oh
usually is,
yeah,
she says.
it's so yeah. And then Kara tries to deny it in an even dorkier way, and then Alex is like, "You're
Yep.
looking at him like you're looking at those sticky buns you eat," and it's like Kara had nothing,
Nothing. Nothing to say
nothing.
about that. But when it was revealed that Supergirl was related to Superman, we got an introduction to the villain of the week, who is Reaction. And Reaction is actually human, but he has beef with Superman because he failed to save his wife in the same accident that caused him to be Reaction in the first place. So he wants revenge on Superman. So he attacks on a highway crash Kara was saving. He arrives there and immediately goes for the kill.
Yeah, it's a pretty big sequence. I think this is an example of some things we did lose in later seasons. You can see the budget kind of in these episodes, but
Yes.
one of the things I liked about this sequence, even though I think the attack was done really well, like he's very menacing. He's a very good, I think, villain in this episode for Kara, and I think that's important. But what I loved about this sequence is it opens with her actually helping get a bus driver out of like a crashed bus, and I really miss this in later seasons that they show Kara doing these arguably smaller things still and helping.
Yes.
And I think that's a very core part of who she is. And there was something they did a really nice piece of wire work with her descending into the turned over bus that I thought was like, I miss this too. Wow, this looks cool.
Yeah. Yeah. But in that fight, Kara actually holds her own.
Yes.
She actually managed to damage the core or the main piece of the reaction armor, to the point that he has to retreat. And because he had to retreat, he went and kidnapped Max Lord. This is the first time that Max Lord actually is in the episode, because in the previous episode he had like a brief cameo in the background in one of the TVs. It is revealed that Gwyn is like a fan of him. But this is the first episode that he is in. Reaction kidnaps Max Lord and use him to actually like repair the armor. Kara goes to the DEO because she wants to go save him. And the DEO refuses because as Reaction is a human, it falls out of the DEO purview. So she goes to Gwyn and James. She asks for their help, but James is hesitant. He tells Kara that Reaction is extremely powerful and that Clark barely managed to get him to a standstill. And that is when we realize that Clark Kent is Superman. He has his whole freak out, but Kara says she's not going to call Superman for help because if she does, she's finished. And if she's going to be defined as Supergirl by anything, it's going to be by her own mistakes, her own losses, and her own wins. And that is basically, like we were saying earlier, this is basically the true line and the lesson that these two episodes back to back reflect. She goes and tries to rescue Max Lord, but Reaction is actually really, really strong. And she's basically going to be defeated. And James called Superman. We never see Superman actually because at this point in the show, they couldn't actually use Superman. Like we never got the face of the actor that was playing it at the time. Every time he showed up, it was like in this very blurry scene. We basically just see the cape and the fact that he's a brunette. But he rescues Kara. She wakes up. The first thing she sees is an interview with Max Lord that he says he was never scared because he knew the hero was going to rescue him, and that hero was Superman.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing about this section of the episode is I think it also ties back into Kara's saying stronger together, working with people. Wynn basically found them a space, an old office nobody wanted to use in Catco.
Yes.
So they had somewhere they could talk more privately about all of the Supergirl activities, for lack of a better phrase. And I love in this scene that Kara seems so genuinely shocked and touched that somebody would do this much. And I think that's just such a great character point for her, that I think she does really see people in that sense and sees what they do and appreciates what they do. And I think that really becomes a very strong core of who she is going forward in the progression of this character. And then the fight sequence, I think they did very well, because I think they start inserting something in that I think is very important to differentiate Superman from Supergirl. We learn a bit later on in the show, because this is a little early for it to occur, is her motto becomes hope, help, and compassion for all. And there's something she says when she's talking with James about this, and he's like, you shouldn't go do this. And she's like, everybody deserves a chance, because they find out this guy's real name and his backstory. And she does try to actually talk to him person to person before it devolves into the fight. And I think this is like a very important aspect of who she is as Supergirl going forward, that we're seeing the seeds being planted here.
It is, you know, that growth that Kara has in this road to become her own person and her own hero. But in the meantime, before Kara went to fight Reaction, Alex came in to help them because she couldn't help with the DEO, but she could help her sister. So she went behind Hank's back and helped Kara. But then when she wakes up, Kara needs to go to the gala that Kat has been trying to organize the entire episode, because she made a cover for Supergirl for her interview. And throughout the episode, she has been calling Kara to organize everything again. Kara is her personal assistant and basically does everything for Kat. But when she wakes up, she needs to go to the gala. Alex presents her with a bulletproof dress that I don't know how it works, but okay, go for it. Before she goes to the gala, she had a pretty intense conversation with James, because James was there when she woke up, and she realized that he was the one who called Superman for help. And she took it as him not trusting Kara to be her own hero. So when she gets to the gala, she has banter with Kat about being late. Wynn comes in and saves her by saying that actually Kara was like signing all the covers of the magazines in your name. And she was like, okay, whatever. She moves on and goes flirt with Max Lord for some reason. But when Win and Carl dancing, we get this really clear vibe that they are, at least from Kara's POV, pretty much only friends. And that is not going to change. But then James comes in, asks Kara for a dance. The vibe completely changed. It is very much romantic, but the dance is mostly for James to actually apologize for calling Superman. And he says something about that is something that he always does. He always calls Superman or Clark when he's scared. And that was basically his explanation as to why he did it, but also why he moved to National City in the first place.
Yes, I really love the progression of these scenes because I really felt Kara was justified in her reaction to him because she had explained before the fight, I need to do this on my own. And like you said, she had this really eloquent, I think, and very clear thought, I have to do this on my own with my own successes and my own losses, and I need to live with them and I need to learn from them. And I can understand her reaction in this scene that I kind of love that they have her wake up in her apartment and James and Alex are there and that she is so mad about it. Like, I understand it. She has every right to be mad about this. But I think
Yeah.
she was mad at a level that I think she was also trying to explain why she was mad, which is, I think, a good sign of communication between these two. So I really like this progression of she's saying, "Hey, I'm mad," and validly so, and this is why. And, we progress to the gala sequence, which it is kind of funny to see all of the women who are doing sort of the waitress scene, for lack of a better phrase. They're all dressed
Yes.
up as Supergirl. It is kind of funny because, of course, Kara is not dressed as Supergirl here. She's in the bulletproof dress Alex gave her.
Yes.
And then I agree, like the energy with Win, I think I really did pick up on it this time in particular. Kara's whole body language, her whole tone of voice, her all of her reactions to him are very much, sure, we're friends, we can have a dance. It's kind of like whatever. She's just like, sure. Whereas when James comes in, like her entire body language changes and you can tell. I really love how he explains it to her because I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, he was still in the wrong, but he's like just explaining why this happened. And I think it's
Mhm.
actually kind of beautiful because he also says to her, I always believed in you and I do believe in you. And I think that's really important that she also hears that from somebody else at this point, not just
Yes.
Alex, not just in the past, her mother saying it to her. And yeah, the whole dance is very romantic, even in contrast to Max Lord and Kat. Their dance is very flirty and fun. Is
Yes.
like when you watch like James and Kara's dance, it's very much romantic, capital R.
Yeah, for me, this is actually why the love triangle between James and Gwen and Kara is very irrelevant. From Kara's POV, she was never interested in Gwen. So Gwen created himself this love triangle on his own. Though I will say that they did play the James Gwen quote unquote rivalry very well. Because it felt very jokey, very humorous. That was the comedic aspect of that relationship. But it was never really serious in the sense of we never had a chance. For Kara, it was only James, at least in this season. But then in the gala, Reactron attacks because again he is looking for Supergirl to get revenge on Superman. Kara, she changes, goes in the super suit. Alex is on comms with her. At this point, Hank had already figured out that Alex was helping Kara in the download using the resources, but not on any official capacity. But this is actually the first time that we get hints that Hank is not just Hank. This is the first time that we see like the red eyes, like the hints that is actually John. But Alex figures out that Reactron, whatever power source that he has in his suit, can be like counteracted by lead. And I want to say, lead in this show, very useful. It works for everything. But Kara uses one of these statues at the museum because they are in a museum for the gala. She melts it with her heat vision, uses the lead to cover her hand, and then she grabs the power source. But as a distraction, James screams at Reaction, "Hey, I'm Superman best pal. You can come for me." And he's basically bait as he's running about while Kara picks up the lead statue and actually saves Win for a certain death. It was a really nicely done fight sequence.
It really, really was. And I think one of the little moments I do love here is I think we've kind of touched on this. I do like the different ways, particularly in these earlier episodes, you can see that they're trying to play with what Kara can do with her powers and letting her be creative and playing with it. And I really love that. I know in some circles people think, Superman and Kryptonians are overpowered, but I come from it from the POV. You should play with it, do different things. And I do like that this show, particularly in this season, really does play with a lot of that. I love the moment when I think it's one of the pillars in the museum, Reactron like knocks it over and almost falls on Win. And Kara catches it, of course, because she's, super strong. The look on Win's face, it's like he never processed that she's super strong. And he's just like, what? And just, I don't know. I just thought it was such a nice touch that he's just like, whoa, what? But I do think the whole sequence is very well done. I think it also ends with once Reactrons kind of stop, James comes back out and Car's like, you took a real risk. And he's like, yeah, well, he's like, I think you said something like, I knew you'd save me, which I thought was a nice touch to end the scene on.
Yeah, totally. And then obviously because they capture and finish the villain of the episode, they go to the DO, I
Mhm.
believe.
Yes.
Sarah has a conversation with Alex. Alex is just like, you should go and talk to James because he makes you smile in
Yep.
a way that is currently she's interested in that. Kara takes the opportunity and she is going to talk to James, but then, and this is actually the real love triangle of this season. She goes to Catco and she finds James talking with Lucy Lane. And this is the first time that Lucy is in the show. And it is very much implied that they had a previous romantic relationship and that Lucy is interested in going back to that. But Kara seeing that, she actually retreats, goes to her desk, and she has a chat open with Clark, who is basically congratulating her for catching reaction, something that he couldn't do. So this is one of the times that along the season that they try to make it like a communication between Clark and Kara that never really happens. And so again, they get very creative in having that conversation between the characters, but even though it's never really him in person there.
I think it was a nice touch to find a way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It just becomes tiring as this season progresses. But in these first episodes, it's very creative the way that they manage to have like a conversation between Clark and Kara or Superman and Supergirl without him being actually present. And actually, I think it was the right move to not have him be there every single time.
Yes, I think it really, really was. Absolutely.
Because you want to separate Supergirl from Superman.
Yeah,
That she's her own person, regardless of her relationship with Superman.
absolutely.
But then the episode actually ends with Kara and Alex having an iconic couch scene on Kara's apartment. It is the first mention of pot stickers and how much Kara loves them. Alex saying, I'm going to eat that pot sticker. And Kara's like, absolutely not. If that pot sticker is not in my mouth in the next second, I'm going to melt your face. The banter is really sister like. I love it. But it is a very funny and dynamic scene. We know that the shot of Alex getting like smacked in the face with a pillow was actually Melissa just throwing the pillow and hitting her. And they cut it.
Yeah, and they just decided to keep it in. I think it was the perfect way to end what is become, I think, for fans of this show, iconic Danvers sister scene. Them on
Yes.
the couch, eating food, watching something. It's such an integral emotional part of the show, I think.
Yeah. In that final scene with Alex, Kara says a line that I think pretty much encapsulates the relationship between these two. The line is something along the lines of Kara not always needing Superman to be her hero and save the day, but that she will always need Alex, in her corner.
Yes.
And that is basically the soul and the core of the entire show. It is like Kara started being Supergirl to save her sister.
Mhm.
Alex is the most important person in Kara's life. And I think the show is very clear in that even though as the show progresses, it gets less and less brought up the fact that Alex is the most important person in Kara's life.
Yeah, this reminded me of something from the previous episode that stuck with me. Is there is a line that Alex says to her when they're trying to I guess they were trying to kind of apologize to each other over the sort of slight headbutting they had in episode 2 a little bit at some point. And it's after the Astra reveal, is Alex said, "You've always had the heart of a hero." And it struck me when I watched it this time that Alex says that to her. And in the flashback in this same episode, Allura says this to her as well. So I think it's very telling that these people who arguably for those phases of Kara's life both say that to her, the arguably most important person at those moments in her life say this to her. And I do find it interesting that this phrase becomes reworded by somebody in the next season in a different way that I think you can kind of see how somebody else becomes arguably the next most important person in Kara's life, and that Lena says to her, "You are my hero." And I think, I don't know, to me this is like I got chills when I noticed that this time. And I think another thing I wanted to say, since we are towards the end of talking about these two episodes, there's something I wanted to say that I think is important. I think about both of these episodes. These episodes almost feel, like you said, a combined story of coming out of the shadow of Superman. And I think something else that happened in these episodes that I think is so critical is you can really see the solidification of Alex and Kara's relationship, Kat and Kara, James and Kara. And I think another thing you really start to see that it's also happening with the actors. And I know in our previous episode, we did mention that Melissa was quite young to be cast as a lead of such a big broadcast network show, and such a risky one at the time as well, like a female-led superhero solo show. But I think what you feel in these episodes as well is I think you really do sense that everyone really is naturally following her lead, which I think is interesting at this point because actually she's not as experienced as an actor as some of the people who are in the show with her at this point. But the fact that they are all taking her lead, I think to me it really is an indication that she is a natural leader and that she really was meant to be in this role. Like you can really feel all of the little points of contact, almost like the glue is starting to solidify, and the pathways of what we are going to keep seeing going forward in this show. And I don't think it can be overstated how much a lot of that is dependent on how dedicated and strong your lead number one on the call sheet is. And I think that is a testament to Melissa's skill as a performer and her dedication as a performer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this season is very good at putting down the base of what the show is going to be moving forward in that sense. Like, the actors will follow always, like, Melissa's lead. And you see it perfectly encapsulated in this first season, especially. I think it's fair to say, like, for me, the cornerstones acting wise of this show, especially in this season, is Kyler and Melissa. And the fact that you absolutely buy that they are sisters that had this contentious relationship at the start, but that have become the most important person in each other's life. And I think that is basically, you need to believe that for this show to actually lifts off and move forward. That is basically the, like I said earlier, like the cornerstone of why Supergirl became Supergirl. Why Kara decided to save the plane. It wasn't because it was a plane that was falling. It was because it was a plane that had Alex in it.
Yes.
But yeah, that is basically episode 2 and 3. And like we said, it had the true line of basically the first steps of Kara as a hero, the stumblings and the standing up once again to face the music. Another thing that I wanted to mention was there was a scene in the episode 2 that they actually shot with Astra and a medic of some sort, where they talk about the kryptonite. And it seems like it is obviously not a known element for the Kryptonians at that point, but it was interesting that immediately after that, we don't see the Kryptonians in the episode 3. They are
Yeah.
completely absent, presumably because they are laying low to not get more kryptonite and be hurt. But the kryptonite thing will come into play in future episodes.
I've remembered something else I noticed in this episode is when James and Kara are dancing, Kara says at one point, "What's so bad about falling?" And the word falling stuck with me because there is an episode later on in season 1 that it has that exact word as a title. And I don't know, that kind of stood out to me for some reason.
One of my favorite episodes of the season, actually.
It's a great episode.
Another thing that I wanted to curd around was these two episodes had three ships that were quite popular at the time. In the second episode, we had a scene between Alex and Astra that immediately sparked people into shipping them. I personally never saw it, but I know it was popular even until the very end of the show. Obviously, we had that we didn't talk about in the pilot episode was people were shipping Kara and Kat at the time because they had this banter. Again, I never saw it, but I do know about it. That continue in these two episodes. But also one that actually never quite comes back except maybe in the finale of the season. And probably because both actors left is Kat and Max that they flirted in this episode, in episode 3 in the gala. I have to say that worked better for me than any relationship between Max and Alex that they tried to do in this season, and actually worked for any ship that Kat had in any episode for me.
I have to say, I was not aware of the Astra Alex one until I got a bit more active in the fandom. But the one, I think the other two I was aware of. And I have to say, for those ships, I didn't really see them either. I can understand them, of course. It's just I didn't personally
Yes.
see them. And I have to agree. I think for me, Max and Kat worked better than anything else they tried with Kat, in terms of something flirty, sexy, romantic, whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it. I think that worked better than anything else they ever tried with her romantically. But yeah, it's amazing how many ships came out of this show. I will say about Kat and Kara, I do love their dynamic. I do
Yes.
think the actors have a fantastic rapport on screen. You had spoken about like Kyler and Melissa's rapport, and we have to believe it
Yes.
for that to really make the show, I think, be solidified. I think secondarily, you really have to believe the connection between Kat and Kara, because you have to believe that Kara is going to take her advice and take it to heart, because Kara is a bit brash and stubborn and impulsive, but she does take that advice, and I think that's an important dynamic, and it has to also work, particularly in this first season.
Yeah, kudos to actually Callista because on paper, Kat is actually not a likable character. And actually, in the show, everyone is freaking scared of Kat, right? Because she's brash and she says everything that comes to her mind. But she's very brilliant. She's a self made woman and she takes no prisoners for that. Like, she doesn't care. She's just doing her thing. But on paper, Kat is not a likable character. And even with Callista's charms, Kat can come off as a really insufferable character. But even when she does have these amazing advices or something to start a conversation with, usually Kara, she really, really shines.
Yeah, and I'm remembering a moment that happened over the article that Kat wrote. Is she asked Kara, "What do you think?" Because she had Kara like read it over. Kara has a moment where she says, "Isn't the tone a little bit nasty?" And I think that
Mhm.
Kat can come across that way sometimes, like kind of mean, a little nasty. But again, I think it's because, again, like you said, self-made woman, she's made her way in the world. I think she's gonna say whatever she wants to say, and she's just gonna go forward with that.
Yeah, totally. And to be fair, she at the end of the day, she made Kara Danvers more secure on herself, but also as Supergirl. Kat is her mentor, any way you slice it. And she made Kara, and she had a right to say that she made Supergirl as well. She technically did.
Doesn't she say trademark pending at some point over the name?
Yes, yes, she
I
does.
just
Yes,
there
she
are
does.
moments where I just love cats on seriousness.
She's again, she will say whatever she wants to say and she will say it unrepentant. But yes, that was basically both the episodes. I'm thinking this episode is going to be a little bit long, same as the pilot episode. But hey, we had a lot to talk about. It just happens. Please remember to comment, like, subscribe, and all those things. It really does help. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And I hope you join us for the next.
Hope you enjoyed, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. El Mayara.
El Mayara.